The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Nadia always thought was a cruel kind of irony. Tuesdays being the most ordinary day of the week, the kind of day nothing was supposed to happen. She was sorting jars in the back of her uncle's dry goods store in Halifax when her cousin shoved the envelope at her without ceremony. "It's from the agency," he said, and went back to stacking flour sacks like he hadn't just handed her the rest of her life. The agency. The Prairie Placement Bureau. 3 months ago, in a moment that felt less like desperation and more like arithmetic, she had done the numbers on what she owed her uncle for 2 years of room and board, on what she made sweeping floors and minding the counter, on what the future looked like if she stayed. She had written to them. She'd filled out their form at the kitchen table at midnight, answered questions about cooking and sewing and whether she was afraid of horses, and posted it before she could think better of it. The letter said a rancher in the Northwest Territories needed a housekeeper. His name was August Calloway. He had 2 children, ages 7 and 4. His wife had passed the previous winter. The pay was $12 a month plus room and board. She would need to be in Winnipeg by the 15th of September to take the supply train west. Nadia read it twice standing between the pickled beets and the lamp oil. Then she folded it back into the envelope, tucked it inside her apron, and went back to sorting jars. She was on the train 6 days later. She'd expected flat. She hadn't expected this flat. Land so wide it made her feel exposed in a way she hadn't since childhood, like something vast could see her from every direction. The prairie in September was still green near the tracks, but drying gold at the edges, and the sky above it was a color she didn't have a name for, somewhere between pewter and violet in the late afternoon light. The woman from the bureau, a Mrs. Holt who'd met her at the Winnipeg station and escorted her on the connecting train, had given her a folder of papers to sign, terms of placement, conditions of conduct, what was expected, what wasn't permitted, what happened if she left before 6 months. Nadia read every word. She'd learned to read every word. "Mr. Calloway is a quiet man," Mrs. Holt told her somewhere between Brandon and the next stop, which didn't seem to have a name. "He runs Ironwood Station alone since his wife passed. You'll manage the house. The children need tending. He doesn't need conversation, just competence." "What does that mean?" Nadia asked. Mrs. Holt had looked at her the way experienced women look at younger ones, who are asking the wrong question at the right time. "It means don't expect warmth," she said. "Expect fare." The wagon that met her at the Stonewall Creek Depot was driven by a boy of about 14 named Percy, who didn't say anything beyond Calloway. When she stepped off the train and when she said yes, jerked his head toward the wagon bed and climbed back onto the seat. She put her trunk in herself. They drove for 2 hours. The land changed, less flat, more rolling, with stands of poplar turning yellow along creek beds and sky so wide, she kept catching herself checking for clouds just to have something to measure distance against. By the time they turned down a rutted track, marked with a post that read Ironwood, the sun was sitting right on the horizon, and everything was the color of old copper. The ranch came into view at the bottom of a gentle slope. It was not what she'd imagined, though she wasn't sure what she had imagined. Substantial was the word that came to her. A 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, corrals, a smokehouse, a root cellar built into the hillside. Signs of hard work and, she thought, hard time. A gate that needed rehinging. Paint peeling off the porch railing. The kitchen garden visible at the side of the house, mostly gone to seed. A man came out of the barn as the wagon pulled up. August Calloway was not a tall man, but he was built the way men who work with their hands and their backs get built. Through and through, no waist to him. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that had been weathered by cold and wind into something permanent-looking like stone. He looked at the wagon, then at Nadia, still sitting in the back, and something moved in his expression that she couldn't read. He helped her down, one hand quick and impersonal, and then he stepped back. "Miss Petrov," he said. "Not a question." That's right. She looked at him directly. She'd learned that too. Look people in the eye right away before they decided what to make of you. "Nadia Petrov, the agency said you needed someone who could manage a household." "I do. Then I expect we'll get along," she said. His eyes, gray, she noticed, the particular gray of sky before snow, stayed on her for a moment longer than was strictly polite. Then he nodded and turned back toward the house. Inside, 2 children hovered at the bottom of the stairs. The older one, a girl with her father's dark hair and an expression suggesting she had opinions she hadn't decided to share yet, stood half behind the newel post. The younger one, a boy, was less circumspect. He had come to the edge of the last stair and was staring at Nadia with the complete openness that only 4-year-olds manage. "That's Josephine," August said, which made the girl's mouth tighten slightly, as if she'd rather introduce herself. "And Henry." Henry stuck out his hand with great solemnity. Nadia shook it. "You're going to be our new housekeeper," he announced. "That's right. Our last one left," he said. She said the winters were too lonely, Henry, said his father. Henry considered his father, then looked back at Nadia. Are you afraid of lonely? Nadia thought about Halifax, about the narrow room above the store, and the sound of her cousin laughing with people downstairs while she lay awake. About the way loneliness in a crowd was a different animal entirely from the honest solitude of a wide country. Not especially, she said. Henry nodded like she'd passed something. Josephine still hadn't said a word. The first week was an education in what the house needed and what it had been going without. The kitchen was functional but disorganized, in the way that happens when no one with a system has been in charge. Supplies in the wrong order, the wrong stores laid in for winter. The bread she found in the bin 3 days past keeping. She threw it out without ceremony and started a new batch. She found the garden still had salvageable root vegetables, and spent a morning pulling them before frost took the last of it. August didn't offer guidance or oversight. He appeared at meals, ate without complaint, said thank you with a precision that suggested he'd been reminding himself to say it, and went back out. He was in the barn before she was up, and still there past dark. She could see the lamp burning through the gaps in the boards when she cleared the supper dishes. Josephine helped without being asked. That surprised Nadia. She'd expected resistance, or at least the testing of limits that children do when a stranger arrives. Instead, the girl appeared in the kitchen after school and began drying whatever Nadia was washing. She didn't talk much. She watched. Henry talked enough for both of them. Papa doesn't eat enough, he told her on the third day. Mama used to make him eat more. She'd put extra on his plate, and he'd pretend not to notice. I'll keep that in mind, Nadia said. She put extra on his plate that evening. He didn't say anything, but he ate it. Why did you come all the way out here? Josephine asked one evening, about 10 days in. She was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, her lamp in her hand on her way to bed. Her voice was careful in the way of a child who has been told not to ask too many questions, but has questions anyway. Nadia thought about it honestly. Because I needed somewhere to be, she said. And this somewhere needed someone. Josephine considered that. That seems like a fair deal, she said, and went upstairs. The first snow came in October, earlier than expected according to Percy, who had materialized as a semi-regular presence. He worked for August part-time and seemed to consider Nadia a curiosity worth checking on. This is early, he said, looking at the sky with the resignation of someone who'd been getting bad news from clouds his whole life. Gonna be a hard winter. She was splitting kindling when August came around the corner of the house and stopped when he saw her. I can do that, he said. I know you can, Nadia said, and split another piece. I can also do it. He stood there for a moment with the expression she was starting to recognize, the one where he was deciding whether to say something. Usually he decided against it. This time he said, You're not what I expected. What did you expect? He looked at the axe, then back at her. Someone more, he stopped. Decorative, she offered. Something moved in his face that might very distantly have been humor. Something like that, he said. My father ran a fishing operation on the coast, Nadia told him. I grew up being useful or being in the way. I chose useful. He was quiet for a moment, then... Your father, he passed 3 years ago. She said it the way she'd learned to say it. Flat, factual, giving no foothold for pity. It's just me now. August looked at her for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said. Not the way people say it when they're uncomfortable and want to move on. The way people say it when they know exactly what it means. Then he picked up the maul and began splitting logs beside her, and they finished the cord together without speaking another word. The hard winter Percy had predicted arrived in November and meant what it said. The temperature dropped to things Nadia hadn't known temperatures could be, and Ironwood Station pulled in on itself the way a living thing does against the cold. Cattle came down from the far pasture. The water pump had to be worked 3 times a day or it froze. She learned to bank the stove before bed and still sometimes woke to frost on the inside of the windows. She also learned that August Calloway had not slept a full night since his wife died. She figured it out by listening, the creak of his step on the stairs, the particular sound of the kitchen chair at 2 a.m, the way the stove draft shifted when someone opened it to add wood in the dark. She never went down. It wasn't her place. But she noticed. She noticed other things. That Josephine had her mother's laugh. Nadia knew this because August had gone still and far away the first time it happened at supper, that startled look of grief that comes when something beautiful blindsides you. That Henry slept with a small carved horse she recognized as handwork, smooth with handling. That August kept his wife's Bible on the mantel but never touched it, just left it there like a marker of something he wasn't ready to put away. She didn't ask about any of it. It wasn't her business. But she found herself being careful in the way you are when you understand that someone is carrying weight they can't set down yet. The bad night came in December. Nadia woke to Henry crying. Not the crying of a bad dream, which she'd learned, but the hoarse, continuous crying of a sick child. She was out of bed before she was fully awake, and she met August in the hall with a lamp, both of them arriving at Henry's door at the same moment. The boy was burning up. What followed was the longest night she could remember since her father's last illness. They worked in shifts and then together, cold compresses, broth coaxed in small spoonfuls, watching the fever climb and pray it would break. August was beside her the whole time, not in the way of a man who doesn't know what to do, but in the way of a man who is terrified and doing it anyway. He held his son and talked to him quietly in the small hours. Stories about the ranch in summer, about the horses, about things Henry had said that made him laugh, his voice steady and low. By morning, the fever broke. Nadia was wrung out to nothing, and August looked like a man who'd walked back from a long way. They were sitting at the kitchen table with the gray light coming in, Henry finally asleep upstairs, and neither of them had said anything for a while when August said, "Thank you. You don't have to thank me," she said. "He's a good boy, he is." August turned his cup in his hands. Then, without looking at her, "Eleanor, my wife, she was the one who always knew what to do when they were sick. He stopped, started over. "I've never been much good at the parts that require patience. You were patient tonight. I was scared." "Those aren't opposites," Nadia said. He looked at her then, that direct gray look she'd stopped being unsettled by somewhere in the past 2 months. "No," he said, "I suppose they're not." Josephine decided to trust her in February, and Nadia only knew it had happened because Josephine showed her the letter. It was from a girl in Winnipeg, a school friend who'd moved away, and it was the kind of letter 11-year-olds write, full of exclamations and underlined words, and a level of drama that was charming precisely because it was earnest. Josephine read it herself, sitting at the kitchen table, but she read it the way people do when they want someone nearby. "She says her new school is better," Josephine said. "But I don't think she means it. What makes you say that?" "She's trying too hard to sound happy." Josephine folded the letter carefully. "When you're actually happy, you don't explain it that much." Nadia looked at this 11-year-old girl who had just said something a lot of adults hadn't figured out yet. "You're right," she said. Josephine looked up at her. "Did you leave people behind when you came out here?" "No one who was sorry to see me go." "Oh." A pause. "That's sad." "It's also freeing," Nadia said honestly. "When you're not leaving anyone, you can go anywhere." Josephine considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Mama left people behind when she came here," she said. "She used to write long letters. Papa would mail them when he went to town." She straightened a fold in the letter. "He still sends them, to her sister. He says her sister likes to hear what's happening here." Nadia did not trust herself to say anything immediately. She looked down at the bread she was kneading, and gave it the attention it needed. "Your father loves you both very much," she said finally. "I know," Josephine said matter-of-factly and with complete certainty. Then, "Nadia? Yes? I'm glad you're not afraid of lonely. Spring came to Ironwood Station the way spring comes to the north. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once, like a door blown open. In 1 week the land went from white to mud to something tentatively green, and August and Percy worked sunrise to dark mending fences and checking cattle and doing the 100 things a winter postpones. Nadia planted the kitchen garden. She found the seed packets in the storage room, some of them with Eleanor's handwriting on little labels, and she was careful with those ones, planting them where the light was best. She was on her knees in the garden one morning in May, her hands black with good dirt, when she heard horses on the road and looked up to see 2 riders coming down the track at a pace that wasn't casual. Something in her stomach shifted the way it does when you've lived through enough trouble to recognize it from a distance. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and went to find August. She intercepted him coming out of the barn, and she said it plain. "There are men coming, 2 of them, riding fast. I don't think they're neighbors." August looked at her for 1 second, that assessing look, and then passed her at the track. The lines around his mouth went tight in a way she hadn't seen before. "Go inside," he said. "Keep the children in." "Who are they?" "Go inside, Nadia." She went. But she stood at the kitchen window with Josephine beside her. She hadn't been able to stop the girl from appearing at her elbow without making a scene, and they watched together as the 2 riders pulled up in the yard. She could see August standing still in front of the barn. The way he was standing told her things. Not afraid but careful. The way of a man who has encountered this kind of problem before. That night, after the riders had gone and August had sent Percy for the constable in Stonewall Creek, after the children were in bed and the house had settled, he sat down at the kitchen table and told her. His wife, Eleanor, had had a brother, a man named Roland Spears, who had been, in August's careful words, involved in things that didn't bear looking at too closely. When Eleanor was alive, her presence had been a kind of buffer. Roland had kept his distance from Ironwood Station because Eleanor had asked it of him, and he'd loved her, whatever else he was. Eleanor had been dead for 14 months. Roland Spears had been in Red Deer since autumn and had, by the accounting of the men who'd just ridden into Nadia's garden at speed, decided that his sister's death meant certain arrangements ought to be reconsidered, property arrangements. Specifically, the question of whether Eleanor's share in the ranch. She'd brought investment money to the marriage. August said, looking at the table. She'd been the one with savings. Whether that share now belonged to her surviving family. It wasn't a legal claim, August said. His lawyer in Winnipeg had already confirmed that. But a man like Roland Spears didn't need a legal claim to make trouble. Nadia listened to all of it. Then she said, "What do you need?" He looked at her. "What? What do you need to deal with this? What's missing? What would help?" August was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," he said. "Because I'm here," Nadia said simply, "and I know how to keep my mouth shut about things that aren't my business to share. And because you've been carrying it alone since those men came into the yard, and you look like a man who needs to set something down." He did look like that. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the physical work of a long day. "Roland wants money," August said finally. "He thinks Eleanor's investment gives him leverage. It doesn't, legally, but he can make things difficult. He can make creditors nervous. He can start rumors about the solvency of the operation. This is not a large ranch, Nadia. One bad season and one nervous bank, and then we don't give him a bad season," Nadia said. "I'm not sure it's that simple. It's not simple at all." She leaned forward slightly. "But simple isn't the same thing as impossible. What does the lawyer need?" What followed was 3 weeks of work that had nothing to do with bread or children or the kitchen garden. August wrote letters, and Nadia organized them, kept copies, noted dates, tracked responses. She had never kept accounts for anything larger than her uncle's store inventory, but the logic of numbers was the logic of numbers, and she found the ranch's books in a state that would have made anyone nervous, not dishonest, just disorganized, in the way of a man who was better with cattle than columns. She reorganized them. It took 4 evenings with the lamp burning low. When she showed August, he looked at the ledgers for a long time. "Eleanor kept the books," he said. "I know. Nadia had figured that out from the handwriting that stopped suddenly 14 months ago. She was good at it. She was good at most things." He said it the way people say true things that cost them something. "The books show you're solvent," Nadia said, keeping her voice practical, giving him the dignity of not having to respond to what he'd just said. "Not comfortable, but solvent. If we can get that in front of the bank before Roland makes noise, they'll have no reason to listen to him." "We can try. We will try." She closed the ledger. "And Mr. Calloway, August, you should know that I don't intend to go anywhere. Whatever Roland Spears does or doesn't do." He looked at her across the lamplight. His face was doing the thing it did sometimes when he was deciding how much to say. "You barely know us," he said. "I know you well enough," Nadia said. "I know Henry sleeps with the horse you carved him. I know Josephine checks every night that the chickens are locked in because she once saw a fox get one, and she's never forgotten it. I know you say thank you every single time I put a plate in front of you, even though you don't have to, and I know you send letters to a woman in Ontario, just to make sure she doesn't lose her sister entirely." She met his eyes. "I know enough." He didn't say anything for a moment. The lamp between them burned steady. "Roland is bringing someone with him when he comes back," August said. "Someone with authority. County assessor, maybe, or a hired lawyer. Whatever he's planning, it's not finished. Then we'll be ready." Roland Spears arrived in June on a warm afternoon, when the country smelled like clover and everything looked too beautiful to be the setting for a confrontation. He was not the man Nadia had imagined from August's careful, minimal description. She'd expected something rougher. Roland Spears was well-dressed, with the kind of surface affability that Nadia had learned, living in her uncle's store, belonged to men who wanted something from you. He had a lawyer with him, as August had predicted, a young man named Fendrick from Calgary, who couldn't quite hide that he knew this errand was thin. They came to the door. Nadia answered it. "We're here for Mr. Calloway," Roland said. "He's in the barn," Nadia said. "I'm Nadia Petrov. I manage the household." Roland looked at her with the particular assessment of a man who thinks what he sees tells him what he needs to know. "Get him for us," he said. "He'll be in shortly," Nadia said pleasantly. "Would you like to wait inside? I've just put coffee on." They waited. This was deliberate. August came in 5 minutes later, unhurried, and the fact that he'd made them sit in the kitchen with Nadia's coffee cooling in front of them, rather than meeting them in the yard, had rearranged the balance slightly. Nadia watched Roland realize it and watched him recalibrate. The conversation was ugly, but controlled. Roland produced papers. Fendrick presented them with the apologetic professionalism of a man who'd been paid to do a thing he didn't believe in. August listened without speaking, then looked at Nadia. She produced the ledgers, the bank letters, the lawyer's opinion from Winnipeg. Fendrick read them with an expression that shifted from professional blankness to something closer to relief. He said something quietly to Roland that Nadia couldn't hear. These aren't the figures your man described, Fendrick said, to Roland, not to August. The operation is entirely solvent, Nadia said. The financial records are current and have been reviewed by 2 banking institutions. If there's an allegation of insolvency, we'd be interested to know on what basis. Roland looked at her. A long look. Who are you? He said. I told you, Nadia said. I manage this household. She paused, among other things. Fendrick was already folding the papers back. The visit lasted another 40 minutes, mostly composed of Roland trying to find another angle, and Fendrick increasingly declining to assist him. When they left, the dust behind their horses was the most satisfying thing Nadia had seen in months. August stood on the porch watching until they were gone. Then he turned and looked at her. You planned that, he said. The kitchen. Making them wait. Small things matter, Nadia said. When you don't have the big things in your favor, you use the small ones. He was quiet. The afternoon light was long and golden, and the chickens were making their settling sounds from the direction of the coop. It was the kind of moment that felt suspended somehow, held. I couldn't have done this without you, August said. You could have. I wouldn't have. He looked at her directly. There's a difference. Nadia thought about her uncle's store. About ledgers in a back room and being told she was good with numbers, said the way people say you're good at something they don't value. About the form she'd filled out at midnight. I know there's a difference, she said. He reached out, not quickly, and took her hand. Not in the way that meant something dramatic. Just held it for a moment, the way people reach for something solid when the ground has been unsteady. Stay, he said. It was the plainest word he'd said to her in 8 months, and it was enough. I wasn't planning to go anywhere, Nadia said. The summer Roland Spears tried to take Ironwood Station became in Nadia's memory the summer everything else settled into its proper place. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment. It was an accumulation of ordinary things. The morning August came into the kitchen before she was up and started the coffee because he'd noticed she was tired. The afternoon Josephine showed her the letter she was writing to her friend in Winnipeg, asking for help before she sent it. Henry announcing, with great authority, that Nadia was practically family during a conversation with Percy's mother at the harvest supper. August and Nadia were married in September, a year almost to the day from her arrival at Stonewall Creek Depot, in the yard of Ironwood Station with Percy's entire family present and a minister who'd ridden out from town. Josephine stood very straight and held Henry's hand through the whole thing. Henry cried a little but denied it strenuously. Nadia wore a blue dress she'd made herself, and August wore the shirt she'd noticed him, save for occasions he thought mattered. The minister said the formal words. Then August looked at her and set aside the formal words. I'm not good at saying things, he said. You know that by now. I do, she said. But I'm good at showing up. He said it with a steadiness that she'd come to understand was not coldness but its opposite. The steadiness of someone who meant what he said so completely he didn't need to dress it up. And I intend to show up for you. Every day for as long as I've got. Nadia looked at this man who had lost his wife and worked his land and raised his children and sent letters to a woman in Ontario so she wouldn't lose her sister entirely. I came out here because I needed somewhere to be, she said. I stayed because this somewhere needed me. She paused, and because I realized I needed it too, this place, these children. You, Henry, made a satisfied sound, and Josephine hushed him. I promise to work beside you, Nadia continued, not behind you. To tell you when the books don't balance, and when you're wrong, and when you need to eat more than you've put on your own plate. She felt the smile happening, and didn't stop it. I promise to stay through the hard winters and the bad seasons, and whatever Roland Spears sends next. He won't send anything, August said. I know. But if he does, August agreed, and something in his face opened up the way it did sometimes now, less and less often the expression of a man who'd forgotten something was allowed to be good. Percy's mother wept through the whole thing. Percy stood with his arms folded in the way of a 14-year-old refusing to be moved and was visibly moved. Roland Spears made one more attempt that November, a letter through a different lawyer suggesting a different angle. August gave it to Nadia, who read it, wrote a response in the firm, plain language of a woman who had by now corresponded with 3 banking institutions on behalf of Ironwood Station, and sent it off. They never heard from Roland again. The winters after that were hard in the way northern winters are always hard. The cold, honest, and total. Nothing softened, but they were not lonely. Josephine grew, Henry grew faster, in the way of youngest children who are always trying to catch someone. Percy became a full hand at 16, and considered himself a permanent fixture of the place which he was. The cattle improved, the books balanced. The kitchen garden in summer was the best in the county. If Nadia said so herself, she said so. She'd learned to say things like that here, in this place where she had not been told to make herself small. On a morning when Josephine was 17 and home for the summer from school in Winnipeg, Nadia stood at the kitchen window before anyone else was up and watched the light come over the far pasture. She could hear August's step on the stairs. She could always hear it now, was tuned to it the way you become tuned to a sound that means safety, and then his hand on her shoulder. "Coffee," he said. Almost. He stood beside her at the window and looked out at the light. They were quiet together, which was one of the gifts she hadn't expected. The particular ease of silence with someone you have chosen. "You ever regret it?" he said. "Not a question, exactly. Coming out here?" "All of it." Nadia thought about the train from Halifax. About the flat prairie from the window and the color of the sky she hadn't had a name for. About that first night at the kitchen table when Josephine had folded her letter and said that seems like a fair deal. "No," she said. "I didn't expect it to be what it is." She leaned into him slightly, just the pressure of a shoulder. "I expected fair. I got something better. What's better than fair?" She looked out at Ironwood Station. The barn where August was always up before her, the corral where Henry had learned to ride, the kitchen garden she'd planted from seeds with Eleanor's handwriting on the labels, the land that went on and on, under a sky that had finally become familiar. "This," she said, "this is better than fair." Outside, the sun came up all the way, and the frost on the grass caught it, and for a moment everything was the color of something worth keeping.